This is Vanessa Gorman. Now that you know how to make infinitives and recognize infinitives, let's see how we use them. Infinitives are verbal nouns, a kind of verbal noun in the to form, to see, to be seen. As a verb, they derive from a verb form. You look them up under a verb lemma. They have tense and voice. And they can play almost any role. They can be necessary arguments. They can have, excuse me, as a verb, they have arguments or adjuncts or satellites. So they function like a verb in that regard. The subject of an infinitive is in the accusative, generally speaking. As a noun, they can fill any syntactic role a noun could fill. So an infinitive phrase could be used as the subject of a sentence, as the object of a sentence. It can function as an adverb if it's a future indicating purpose. And we also get what are called articular infinitives, which is you stick an article in front of the infinitive just to make it absolutely clear that this is acting as a noun. So you use a neuter singular article. Now, there may be a lot of space. There may be the article and then a bunch of words and then your infinitive. And that's a signal to you that the bunch of words in between are all hanging on or dependent some way on that infinitive. So we'll see examples of this fairly often. Infinitives tend to be negated by may, except in indirect speech, and they are made potential by on. So this is the first time we're going to start seeing may used to negate infinitives. So first off, let's start with the simplest, complementary infinitives. These are sometimes called dynamic in the Cambridge grammar. They're called dynamic infinitives. I call them complementary infinitives. These are things that are necessary arguments. They have to be there to complete the meaning of the verb. Certain verbs simply take an infinitive as a matter of course. And certain categories of verbs are very common. So verbs of knowing, intending, wishing, ordering. Sometimes a verb can take an infinitive, or it can take a subordinate clause, or it can take an accusative object. Kaleuo is a very common word that takes an infinitive. You order someone in the accusative to do something in the infinitive. You wish for someone to do, wish for something to happen. So lots of verbs can take the complementary infinitive, which is labeled as an object, and you check this by going into the LSJ and looking for INF, some or examples of infinitives. So in a complementary infinitive, the infinitive clause is the object of the introductory verb. It does not usually have its own object, or sorry, its own subject if it's a complementary infinitive. Usually it just continues the idea. So, and still no one tried to prevent it. Notice we translate it with an infinitive in English. No one, oudes, tried to prevent yet. And comes out very naturally. To prevent is the object. If that had an object, it would hang on it. To prevent the war, it would hang on the infinitive. Likewise, they wanted to do something. You want to do something with an infinitive. They wanted to send him to Lysander. So send actually in itself has two objects, but it is the object of boulontai. So they wanted to send him to Lysander. Persuade is another example. You persuade someone to do something. So he persuaded Calixenes to lay charges, to accuse. That's actually our English word category. It means kata, against. Agora is that sense of speaking against. You lay charge against someone in the genitive. So lay charges against the generals in the boule. So those are pretty straightforward. Look them up in the dictionary if you're not sure. Another construction that we've already seen with some substantive clauses is the impersonal construction. You can often have the case where the infinitive clause acts as the subject. So we're talking about things like it is necessary to do something. It is possible to do something. It is shameful. It is difficult. It's a care to me. And the common words to introduce this type of constructions are de, meaning it is necessary, cre, meaning it is necessary, exesti, so this is the verb ami with the ek on the front of it, it is possible, and then estin with any kind of neuter nominative subject. It is clear, it is difficult, it is whatever. And then the infinitive clause will act as the subject. Now, you often get an object on the main verb in the dative. It is necessary for me. It is possible for him. So this would hang on the main verb itself. So it is necessary to say this. The subject of the sentence is to say this is a necessary thing. So to say is your subject, but it itself has its own object. De is very, very common. Likewise, it is possible, even for them, to leave no one. Now, notice we have maydes, no one, not udes, but because it's in an infinitive phrase, we use may instead. So to leave no one is possible for them. The for them comes out as an object. The infinitive phrase is the subject. It seemed best to them to accept the peace. Exact same structure. To accept the peace seemed best to them. Seem can also mean just seem best. It often does. So those are pretty straightforward once you know how to hang them. Indirect statements are declarative statements with verbs of saying, thinking, believing, opining. You've seen that we can have subordinate clauses there, but some words take infinitives acting as the object. Again, often with a subject in the accusative. Complementary infinitives don't usually have a separate subject. I want him to do something is not a separate subject, it's two objects. If the subject is not expressed, it's usually the speaker himself, and these happen to be negated by u. So commonly introduced phrase, femi, lego, meaning to say, oida, meaning to know. Epein is another way of saying say. It's an irregular. And fasco is to say or think. Now, what difference does it make whether it's negated by u or may? For your purposes, neither. Just they're both no. The most common forms that introduce indirect speech in the Hellenica are forms of fa, lego, and epein. Those are by and far the most common forms, and you'll see these all the time, and they don't give you any trouble. He said that he would make war on them. There's no stated subject, so the subject of the infinitive is the subject of the sentence. Notice we have a future infinitive, so he's stating his intention. No speaker, so it's probably subject, so it's probably the speaker. How about this? For he was saying that much money was to the king and to himself. So in English, we would say both he and the king had much money. So money is the subject in the infinitive. It's going to be in the accusative. And these are dative of possessions acting as pronoms. The object is the infinitive is the object of the verb of speaking. So we have a subject. The infinitive is the object of that, but this is the subject of that, and these are the pronoms on it. Dative of possessions often act as pronoms depending on the emphasis. He said that he would wish to live. Notice we have on in here, always labeled XY, and it's the sense of he would rather live. It's not a declarative sentence so much as something, a potentiality. He wished to live. This is also an infinitive. So you can have basically subordination to subordination. He said that he wished to live. Indirect speech can be followed by this complementary infinitive, in other words. He thought it would be faint-hearted. What would be faint-hearted? That the attack would be faint-hearted. So this is the future of the verb to be. Used often in this kind of a construction. He thought the attack would be faint-hearted. Now notice, we don't know whether the faint-hearted would be the attack or attack would be faint-hearted. If these are both nouns, you have to choose which you think is the subject and which you think is the object, because they're probably both going to be in the accusative because the subject of infinitives are in the accusative. So those are all pretty straightforward. How about result clauses? These are the easiest because they are subordinate clauses that don't bother conjugating their verbs. They just throw them into the infinitive. It's quick and easy. Always introduced by hosta. So when you see the hosta, you know you're getting a result clause. And the verb is going to be an adverb. It usually follows some kind of qualitative adverb in the main clause, like thus or in such a way or such. And you hang it on that. Hota is a very common one, just meaning thus. Normally, it takes an infinitive. Every now and then you get an indicative to emphasize the fact, but normally it just takes an indicative and it's very straightforward. So if you see hosta, you look for an indicative or an infinitive. So yet he paid the money of a month, so a month's worth of money. Why? With the result that it's not the purpose, it's the result, right? With the result that the army be more eager by much, so much more eager. Again, the subject is in the infinitive, but it's just easy. You see the hosta ani. Now, in this case, there is no earlier adverb or adjective in the sentence on which to hang it. Here's another one of the similar structure. The ones from the town deployed first, this is just acting adverbially, so that, with the result that they filled the road, right? They blocked the road, in other words. For he said that much money would be to the king and himself. We just saw that sentence a minute ago, right? That he said that the king and himself had a great deal of money, with the result that they could fill many ships because of this. So again, subordination to subordination. Now, what about substantive and articular infinitives? When the infinitive acts as a noun, you treat the entire infinitive clause as the noun. And you don't have to have an article to make it substantive, but it makes it clearer when you do have the article, and it's always the neuter article. The subject will be in the accusative again, the negation will be may again. So you get things like this. They gave them, you have to assume a them, they gave the living in exemption from taxes always. So they gave the living in exemption to taxes always. They gave them the privilege of living forever without taxes. So you have an article, you hang it as an attribute on the infinitive. And then it has its own object and it has its own adverb. It is difficult. Kalipon. It would be difficult. Kalipon an. Now notice there is no verb. We a lot of times will have a neuter nominative without the verb to be, but it's something that we're used to seeing like difficult or clear or important. So we just supply the estine as a matter of course. It is difficult. What is difficult? The going forth on the land. Even setting forth on the land, I suppose. Poi is just that weak sort of, I suppose. So the going forth on the land. So epibining has its own object, choros, and the whole thing is acting as the subject of the impersonal sentence. To go forth on the land is difficult, but it's got on here, so it gives it the sense of would be difficult. So by using that one little particle, it changes the tone of the sentence. So supply the verb to be with a neuter nominative if it's commonly used impersonally, and use on if you want to make it potential. All right, so again, we have no verb, so we have to supply the verb to be. The law is. The law is to them not. So they had a law that the not has to go in here somewhere, and I put it on law. Literally, it's no law is to them to rule the same man ruling twice. So this has to be the subject, the same man, autos in the oblique cases, with the um, attributive position means the same. So for the same man to be an admiral twice is not the law to them. So we would say they had a law that the same man could not be now arched twice. So we have to transform the sentence quite a lot to make it good English, but you can see how this infinitive is acting as the subject. This is the law. The law is this. You could label this as the subject and the infinitive is the pronoun. That's just a matter of taste and how you think the emphasis lies. Okay, there's also something with the intimidating name of ep-exegetical infinitives, and that simply means they explain things. Okay, it's a nice long word to mean explanatory infinitives. They can modify verbs to express purpose, especially in the future. You can use an infinitive sometime to modify adjectives or nouns. It's a kind of accusative of respect, but think of it as some of these adjectives and nouns have kind of a verbal meaning in them. And so you get infinitives sometimes. Delightful to hear, wondrous to behold, usually labeled as an adverb, even if it's on a noun. Sometimes it's labeled as an attribute. It's just, this is one of the things people argue about. Actually, on a noun, I would label it as an attribute more often than not. On an adjective, I would label it as an adverb. So this is one of these things where I've changed my mind. So after all these years, he was prepared to go to war. He was prepared. Hetoimos is an adjective, prepared to do something, right? That has that verbal sense of to prepare. So this takes an infinitive to explain it. Conan was signaling. Why was he signaling? For the purpose of to come to help with force, right? So he was signaling to the ships that he wanted them to come to help him. So this is again the sense of explaining the signaling. So the summary of the main uses of the infinitive that we've gone over here. You can use it as a complement to a verb, usually with no separate subject. You can use it with impersonal verbs as the subject. You can use it with indirect statements, often with a different subject. You throw it after a Holste for a result clause. You put an article on it or just treat it as a noun. And sometimes you throw it in as an explanation, especially in the future.